Hey everybody, welcome to my channel. This is Anupama and you are watching Orchid Anu. Today we will be discussing about identifying flower spikes in Phalaenopsis orchids. Come spring and flower spikes begin to develop in Phalaenopsis orchids, there is always some guesswork involved in differentiating between an orchid root and spike in the early stage of their development. Today we will learn how to identify a spike from a root or a new shoot. Generally speaking, during the winters there is a slowdown in growth in your orchids. Towards the end of winter, you will find your orchids putting out new growths. Their growths may be vegetative, such as new pseudobulbs or leaves and roots. You will also notice bud spikes and sheaths filling out, making you excited with the prospect of a good bloom season for your orchids. The flower spikes in Phalaenopsis orchids are induced by a drop of 7 to 10 degrees from the ambient daytime temperature. This means that warm days and relatively cooler nights will induce blooming in these orchids. Sympodial orchids such as Cattleya and Oncidiums bloom on mature pseudobulbs, thereby making it easy for us to recognize when they produce buds. On the other hand, monopodial orchids such as Phalaenopsis and Vanda orchids produce bud spikes on the axis of the plant. These types of orchids also produce new shoots as well as roots on the axis of the plant. Therefore, when the first nubbings appear, it's a guessing game whether the new growth is a potential bud spike or a new root or even a shoot. While a bud spike elicits joy and excited anticipation, a root may not be welcomed with the same gusto. But I beg to differ. Roots are good news too. It actually indicates that the plant is making itself sturdy and strong at the base to withstand the weight of a long bloom-laden spike. Only when your plant is fully secure will it push out a spike. So if you see the orchid pushing out roots, it's only a matter of time before the right conditions will induce blooming in your orchid. Monopodial orchids put out new growths such as roots, shoots and spikes simultaneously. So how do you differentiate between a spike and a new growth or a root? Well, there are simple ways in which you can predict whether the new growth is a spike or a root. Primarily, we need to check the position of the new growth. Roots, apart from absorbing nutrients, provide the plant with proper support. To ensure this, roots develop radially from all sides of the stem, which then provide adequate support and strengthen the plant for a top-heavy inflorescence. Spikes, on the other hand, grow only from an axial bud. This is exactly the spot where the axis of the leaf begins on a monopodial orchid. Also to be noted is the fact that spikes generally appear at the axil of the third leaf from the top or crown, but they may also emerge further down if the node has not bloomed earlier. Occasionally, when the plant is not growing upright and is slanted and growing in the direction of light, the bud spikes may not emerge from the axil of the leaf, but will shift slightly away from the axil of the leaf. This is seen due to the phototrophic movement of the spike. It takes the shortest vertically upward route and emerges away from the axil of the leaf in the direction of light. This can sometimes be confusing to a new grower. However, in such case, the shape of the new growth will help confirm whether it is a bud spike, new growth or a root. The next on the list would be to check for the direction of new growth. One way to identify a root that has developed in the axis of a leaf is to check its direction of growth. If it's growing away from the direction of light or is pointing towards the medium, which provides moisture, then it's confirmed that the new growth is a root. In contrast, a spike will emerge from the axial bud and will begin growing upwards in the direction of light. Next on the checklist is to assess for the shape and color of the new growth. As the new growth emerges, you can easily compare them with other root tips to gauge whether the growth is a root or a spike. Spikes are usually a darker shade of green than the bright green or brown colored root tips. Root tips are also shiny, pointed, rounded, and slightly translucent when compared with spikes. Spikes, on the other hand, are pointed upwards, are leaf green and opaque, with a prominent flat and mitten-shaped projection. This differentiation in the tissue is markedly different from that of a root, which is rounded, glossy, and has a silvery sheen. Very often, spikes may have a burnished purple-brown tinge or may be burgundy colored based on the color of the flowers. So this can also help in identification of flower spikes. Roots also have brown or burnished tips, but this can be verified by comparing the new growth with pre-existing root tips. Sometimes, instead of a spike, Phalaenopsis orchids throw out keikis or basal growths. Keikis or new basal shoots or new growths also develop on the axis of the plant. These growths look similar to a spike since they are sheathed, but they do differentiate into leaf-shaped structures at the tip early on. I hope these simple tips will help you identify flower spikes early on in your Phalaenopsis orchids. You can accordingly take special care of the orchid for a good bloom season. To learn more on how to take care of Phalaenopsis orchid spikes, you can also read my post on taking care of Phalaenopsis orchid spikes. I will leave behind a link in the description. Thank you so much for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel for regular updates on orchid care. Until my next, happy growing and have a great bloom season.